Hello and welcome to another segment of Interviews That Matter. I'm your host Raj Mehta. Friends, in this segment we bring those guests who influence our lives. This includes elected officials, policymakers, heads of major organizations and other dignitaries. It is my sincere hope that the knowledge brought in by this guest will help our community. Today we have such guest. His name is Michael Scotto. He is running for a Nassau County District Attorney. But first he will face a primary on September 10th in a Democratic primary against Medline Singhas. Let's meet Michael. Mr. Scotto, thank you so much for coming.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And congratulations for throwing your hat in a good contest for Nassau County District Attorneys.
Thank you.
Yep. And we wish you all the best for the primary.
I appreciate
it's coming
that.
On September 10th, right?
September 10th, it's a Thursday.
Yep, September 10th, and all Democratic, registered Democrats can vote.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Countywide.
Countywide, right, okay. So before, we want to know you actually, that who you are and what is your background and why do you want to run this?
Sure. Well, I mean, professionally it all starts with working in the Manhattan DA's office, but really it starts when I moved to Port Washington when I was in 4th grade, and that's where I live now. We moved back there so we could raise our kids, and it's kind of neat. My kids are going to the same schools that I went to, but part of the reason why I'm so concerned about the DA's office is, look, I live here, my family lives here, and I know things aren't the same in Nassau as when I grew up here. Back in the 70s, you could leave your car unlocked, you could leave things in your car, you could leave your front door unlocked. We don't have that kind of a county anymore. But professionally, as far as my background goes, I worked for Robert Morgenthau in the Manhattan DA's office for 20 years. I started there right out of law school in 1989. And, I recently saw Mr. Morgenthau at a police athletic league lunch. He asked how my campaign was going. And I told him, well, it's going great, because I tell people I worked for you for 20 years, and your office was the best DA's office in the country, and we don't have that in Nassau County, and we really deserve that kind of an office. And he knows what I mean when I say that. And then when I tell that to people on the campaign trail, I explain, well, the office cared about just the right outcome. It was about what was right, and so you'd make decisions based solely on what the evidence was and what the law was and what was right. You treated everybody the same regardless of their class, their ethnic background, their race, their creed, their beliefs, and you just treated everybody fairly. And in Nassau, you don't see a lot of that. I think people are treated differently depending on where they come from. I also think another a real problem in Nassau is the office is very reactive, not proactive. In Manhattan, we would go after problems before they became, front page news. So, now in Nassau, the DA seems only interested in heroin, although she's more interested in political mailers than heroin these days, but only interested in heroin when Newsday runs a story or News 12 runs a story that 3 kids a week are dying of fatal drug overdoses. You see political corruption's an issue, and they're not doing anything about political corruption. Frankly, we have to thank Preet Bharara, for a federal prosecutor from Manhattan, for coming into Nassau County and trying to clean up the county for us, and that's embarrassing. That's something the DA can do. So those are things we did in Manhattan. We were very proactive on serious crime, and the one thing I say out on the campaign trail is, we have a heroin problem, but heroin doesn't grow here in Nassau County, right? We have a gun violence problem. We had 3 people shot and killed last week in the village of Hempstead within a 4-day period, right? We don't make guns here. They're brought in from somewhere else, usually Carolina, South Carolina, North Carolina. You have to attack those people who are trafficking in drugs and guns. Not being done. The DA's office is very reactive. And so that's why I'm running. And again, it's from my background as a prosecutor in Manhattan. I started in the trial division like most every new ADA, and I worked there for 5 years, handling street crime. The police would make an arrest and you'd have to prosecute the case. So anything from pickpockets to attempted murders, stabbings, shootings, sexual assaults, robberies, the whole sort of range of everything terrible that somebody could do to another person. And then after 5 years, I went to the investigation division, where we worked closely with the New York City Police Department and the state police on long-term investigations investigations. First, it was mostly the construction industry and organized crime, and then I became the chief of that unit. And I was the chief for 10 years. That was the labor racketeering unit. And we had about 10 ADAs and 20 investigators. And we did long-term investigations into organized crime and their corruption of the construction industry. In fact, I was the first state prosecutor to convict the head of one of New York's 5 crime families on state racketeering charges when I was there. And our unit also initiated investigations against a corrupt Republican state senator and a corrupt Democratic assemblywoman for taking bribes. So we didn't play party favorites. It was where the evidence was. Mr. Morgenthau would always say, let the chips fall where they may, and that's how we ran the office. When Mr. Morgenthau left the office and Cy Vance came in 2010, they merged my unit with the Rackets Bureau, and I became the chief of the Rackets Bureau and gained a staff of about 30 ADAs and about 30 support staff members. And in that position, for the last 2 years of my career in the DA's office, was involved in the first 2 state prosecutions for anti-terrorism. There were 2 groups of individuals who were plotting terrorist attacks in New York that, again, working closely with the police proactively, we were able to stop. So that's why I think my background has me very well prepared for this race. And again, it's just my passion about living in Nassau County. I grew up here. I graduated from Schreiber High School. My oldest daughter just graduated last month. My other daughter's also at Schreiber. My son's at Weber, which I attended. Then it was a junior high school, not a middle school. But things are at least as far as the schools go, pretty much the same. Thank God.
So you have a strong background. You know the DA office in and out.
Yeah, I mean this office I have a good idea about, but frankly I want to change this office. This office is really backwards and regressive. One of the issues with the DA's office here that I have a problem with, and it's not good for victims and it's not good for the quality of the cases, is here the DA doesn't assign an assistant DA from the beginning of a case to the end on the vast majority of the cases. And in Manhattan, 40 years ago, Mr. Morgenthau instituted what's called a vertical prosecution system. It's very important because you have one ADA on felony cases. Those are your serious cases from the beginning to the end. So that ADA meets the victim right off the bat within hours. They're talking to them either on the phone or in person or both. And then that ADA brings the case to the grand jury, which you have to obtain a grand jury indictment before you can take the case to trial if it's a felony. And that ADA does the motions and the hearings and the trial, right? And the reason why that's important is there's continuity. So frankly, the way the Nassau DA's office does it, I think is backwards, and we're going to change that when I'm the DA. I mean, I know enough about the office to know, am I intimately familiar with it? I'd be lying if I said I was, right? But it has to be changed. The way that they don't have a dedicated ADA, cases fall through the cracks. One of the things I found interesting was Ms. Singhas, my primary opponent, talks about the Joanna Burg murder case, which is a case that she tried and she got a murder conviction. The only problem, in my view, that's not a success, it's something, frankly, I'd be embarrassed about, was Joanna Burg was murdered because the DA's office dropped the ball. The person who ended up murdering her had been in custody, he was arrested, and the DA's office didn't assign an ADA to the case, just because that's not the way they do it, until day 3. In New York, you have 5 days to indict somebody or they're automatically released. So when day 3 came and the DA's office started looking for Joanna Burg, she couldn't be found because she was afraid and she fled. So on the 5th day, the individual that ended up murdering her got out of jail and found her and killed her. So rather than that being maybe the highlight of somebody's career, I think that's probably something that I frankly wouldn't be proud of. That's a terrible outcome, and again, it's because of the system. And the system hasn't been changed. And that happened when Ms. Singhas was the head of the Special Victims Bureau. And again, this is a system that most other prosecutors' offices changed 40 years ago. And so that's what I would change right off the bat.
Is it an internal process?
It's an internal process. They could do it today. In fact, they could do it tomorrow. It's about the way the DA decides to structure their office and prosecute cases. There's no real good reason not to do it. In fact, there's no real reason at all, good or bad, not to do it.
It's not a law or anything?
No, not at all.
Nothing to do with law?
No, nothing to do with law. It's policy.
It's a policy, basically, in policy and procedures. that you said, right?
Yeah, and frankly, I think the Joanna Burg case should have caused them to re-examine their procedures and when she was murdered, change it. So you have an ADA there from the beginning to support the victims. The other issue is, that's an aberration, thank God.
Right.
But even in the regular case, you have a victim of a domestic violence or sexual assault, something that's very personal to them. It's embarrassing, and then to have them have to explain that to 2 or 3 or 4 different people along the way, they're being victimized again. So it's really, for many reasons, a terrible system that they have in Nassau.
So what is the quality of a best DA?
I think somebody that's fair. I mean, ultimately it's fair. It's not about, Mr. Morgenthau would say this all the time, it's not about just racking up convictions like notches in a gunfighter's belt. Now, you only know what that means if you watch Westerns. But, it's not about keeping score. You obviously want to win the cases you bring, but you only want to bring the cases where there's a reason to bring the case. So first of all, you want to have the evidence. Second of all, you want to make sure that it's important to prosecute somebody. I mean, and send them to jail ultimately. In many cases in Nassau, in my view, they pay too much attention to. There was this Flush the Johns investigation where the DA's office spent a lot of resources on setting up 107 men who wanted to have sex with a prostitute. I mean, I'm not a fan of prostitution. It's against the law. But instead of spending those resources on that case, they could have gone out and arrested 107 gang members or 107 gun traffickers or 107 corrupt politicians, although probably don't have 107 of them in Nassau. maybe it's half of that. I don't know. But you know what I'm saying? That's just focusing on the real serious crime. And that's not what's being done. But again, so number one, it's to be fair, qualities of a prosecutor, to know your evidence, and always to know that the system requires us to treat the defendant fairly. That's what separates our system from most all other systems there. You also have to be tenacious. So you have to be willing to take on a case that's difficult. If you know the person is guilty and it's important, you have to be tenacious and take the case to trial, even if you may not be able to win. I mean, a lot of the times you see prosecutors will make plea bargains if there's a problem with the case. And sometimes that's appropriate. One of the cases we've been reading about a lot has to do with an undercover officer who there were some problems with his paperwork, and as a result of that, the DA gave sweetheart deals to some people who are career drug dealers, right? One guy had 5 prior felony convictions, and he got a reduced deal because there was a problem with paperwork. First of all, if you have the vertical prosecution system, you know what the paperwork is on day one. But on the other hand, if it's just simply a problem with paperwork, you take the case to trial, and you win or you lose, but you're going to try to put somebody in jail for as much time as you can get who has 5 prior felony convictions, right? So you should take that case to trial, and that's the tenacity. So being fair, being tenacious, and being ethical. I think it's not rocket science. You need to have people who are fair and tenacious and ethical, and also empathy. Empathy for the victims certainly is important. So I'd say all 4 of those are important.
Very important, right?
Yeah.
You have heard about the San Francisco killing, right? Recently, about the immigrant, non-immigrant,
yes, I did.
illegal immigrant.
Well, yes, I did see that.
And that also was a cause because they did release them.
Right. I don't read the whole story, but I read something to the extent, correct me if I'm wrong, that the individual had been removed from the country a few times, and then he came back and he ended up killing, I think, a young woman. Yeah. No, I read that, I think, either last night or this morning.
Yeah. So 20 years in Manhattan DA's office. What are your flagship cases that you?
Oh, all right. So basically, I think the one that I had the most influence on and really the most role. I mean, sometimes you'll see somebody who's running for office will take credit for the work of their people. So I'll talk about it. Stephen Crea. He was the acting boss of the Lucchese crime family, and we indicted him and 35 other people, 2 or 3 capos, I think it was 5 soldiers, a lot of construction people, and a couple of, unfortunately, labor leaders. I'm very pro-labor, but if somebody's a labor leader and they're taking money from the mafia to look the other way, I'm not anti-labor, it's anti-corruption. So we did indict some of those labor officials. But that was a case that we worked very closely with the New York City Police Department. We had wiretaps on, over an 18-month period, 64 different phones and pagers. People used to use pagers then. Nobody texted back then. I don't know why. But And that was one of the biggest, probably the biggest wiretap case ever. And through those wiretaps, we were able to learn intimate details of their bribery, their extortion schemes. They were doing bid rigging, and they were, again, bribing labor officials. And we ended up indicting, as I said, 36 different individuals. And it was the first time that a New York State prosecutor had convicted the head of a crime family on state racketeering charges. So that one was a really good investigation. It was a team effort with the police department. And then other cases, also important, prevailing wage. That's one issue you may hear about here in Nassau. The DA's office has stopped apparently prosecuting prevailing wage cases. Basically, if you do work for the government and you're a non-union contractor, you're supposed to pay your workers what's called the prevailing wage. It's the same as the union wage, right? You find a lot of the times people who are non-union contractors will bid to do government work, agree to pay the prevailing wage, and then pay their workers a third of what they're supposed to get, and they put the money in their pocket. So it's not like the taxpayers of the county is saving money, it's just money going into the pocket of the contractor. In Manhattan, we used to do those cases all the time. I mean, some of the biggest cases we had were multi-million-dollar cases involving M.A. Angelides, EMB, which is a Battalius company, Olympia Mechanical Plumbing. I mean, those are all companies that we charge with hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars of underpayment of wages. So those were important cases. They're not flashy cases, but it's important because the workers are being taken advantage of, and also the contractors are taking advantage of the system. Look, if everybody's supposed to pay the union wage, you should pay the union wage, even though you're not a union contractor. That's the law. Otherwise, don't bid on the government work. You don't have to, but if you want to do the government work, you have to. And one of my earliest cases was a crooked landlord who was cheating the Board of Education. At the time, there was a need for a lot of classroom space, and people that owned real estate wanted to turn their buildings into schools. And there was a couple actually from Fort Salonga that decided they wanted to turn a property in Manhattan into a school. And that was, again, they got a little bit of press, but it was more important because the system was broken. And so in addition to sending these two individuals to state prison, we were able to get back $700,000 to the taxpayers of the city of New York that they had stolen, and they took a closer look at the system. And so that changed. So, I mean, sometimes you're fortunate, you get a good result, and you also change the system. And, you're trying to do both things. And look, on the wiretap case, my experience with wiretaps is if you can get court-ordered wiretaps, that's the best way to get evidence. One of my criticisms of the DA is last year, you have to report your wiretaps to the Department of Justice, Federal Department of Justice. Last year, the DA's office in Nassau only reported one wiretap on one phone for 30 days. So if you're only wiretapping one phone for 30 days, right, an entire year, you're not going to be able to get those drug traffickers. You're not going to be able to get those people bringing guns in. And you're not going to be able to get human traffickers, because that's the reason why they did this Flush the Johns case. They said it was about human trafficking. But if human trafficking is going on in Nassau, we should obviously go after it, but we need to go after it proactively by going after the people that are trafficking. And the terrorism cases were, again, I was, I don't want to take entire credit for that. I was the bureau chief. I was part of the team. We had assistant DAs working on those cases day and night with the police department, and it really was day and night because there were undercovers involved, and they were trying to stop, in the first case, 2 individuals from blowing up a synagogue, and in the second case, another individual who wanted to make pipe bombs and blow up soldiers who were coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. And both those cases were important because obviously civil liberties are very important, and the police department in the city has gotten a lot of criticism about how far they go, but it's important that they monitor people who on social media have anti-American sentiments, and then they look at them and then they see where it leads to. Obviously, people have free speech. You can say anything about the country if you're here, whether you're a citizen or not. But it's important to keep an eye on that. I mean, we have to remember the Constitution isn't a suicide pact. It's everybody has constitutional rights, and so it was interesting because we really had to balance the rights of individuals against those of society. And the police did a very good job, and we were able to bring indictments against both those individuals, both those sets of individuals.
Good. We'll take a short break and we'll be right back.
Okay.
Please stay with us. Welcome back to Interviews That Matter. I'm our host Raj Mehta. We are having a conversation with Mr. Scotto, Mike Scotto, he's running for a Nassau County District Attorney's office, and he's facing a primary.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about primary now. You are doing a primary against Medline Singhas.
Yes, I am.
And she is in the office for like 10 years maybe, who knows,
Yes.
I don't know how long.
About 10 years.
About
yeah.
10 years. And she claims that she is the most qualified person because she has been already running the
Right.
office.
That's right.
So give me your
I've certainly
take.
heard her say that she's the only qualified person or the most qualified or there's no one else as qualified.
Right.
Ultimately, I am running a primary against her. Ultimately, I'm running against Kate Murray because I'm going to beat Ms. Singhas in the primary. So I like to say I have two opponents. I have one opponent who has no record. That's Kate Murray. We'll put her aside because that's down the road. And I have another opponent, the primary opponent, who has a record, but it's a terrible record. Now, people say, oh, she's only been the acting DA for 5 or 6 months, but we have to remember she was the chief assistant for the 5 years before then, right? So she had the #2 spot in the DA's office. So the fact that you have 14 murders 2 years ago in the village of Hempstead. Last year was a little bit better. It was 11 murders. It's awful. I mean, there's only 50,000 people in the village of Hempstead, right? The fact that you have 3 kids a week dying of fatal drug overdoses. The fact that political corruption is rampant in Nassau County. Well, that all happened on Ms. Singhas' watch when she was the chief assistant. And again, the case I talked about before the break, the Joanna Burg case, where the victim was murdered, right? Rule number 1, you have to protect your victims, right? That was when she was the chief of the Special Victims Bureau. So, I mean, I think her record isn't a good record, and I think the idea, I mean, sometimes, look, she takes credit for everything. If you look at her, I mean, I brought my palm card here. Everything that I say there I actually did. If you look at hers, she's taking credit for everything that went on in the office, but if there's a problem in the office, she doesn't take credit for that. She doesn't take the blame for that, right? So again, she's only been the acting DA a couple of months, and frankly, the reason why she's the acting DA, at least in my view, was she was the only executive to actually live in Nassau County. All the other assistant DAs with supervisory positions live outside the county. So the chief assistant has to be somebody who could be the DA, so it means you have to live in the county.
Right.
And again, the idea that she's the acting DA, well, I mean, that's just the law. Every time Kathleen Rice left Nassau in the last 5 years before she went to Congress, Ms. Singhas was the acting DA.
Right.
The only difference now was Rice wasn't coming back, and Ms. Singhas decided she would bring in some cameras and swear herself in as the acting DA. So again, that gets to my point that I think she's more a politician than a prosecutor. We both say we're prosecutors, not politicians. I actually had that first. It's on both of our material. But I think if you look at what she's doing, she's more a politician. I mean, I just read in Newsday the other day that she was scolding the legislature for not passing a law that she suggested about political mailers. By the way, I think political mailers are wasteful. I think there should be a law, but right now there isn't a law. The DA made her position quite clear. She asked that the legislature pass a law. I think that's appropriate, but they haven't passed the law. I don't think the DA should scold them. And I think, frankly, the DA should focus on the laws we do have. So, she wrote a letter to Norma Gonzalez, the presiding officer, saying you should pass this law, right? Newsday said scolding the legislature. It seemed to me, almost like a temper tantrum. She wanted them to do something, and they wouldn't do it. But, Ms. Singhas took a pass on looking at Norma Gonzalez's campaign finance filings. Newsday reported a couple of months ago that Ms. Gonzalez hadn't filed reports for 9 years, total of like 36 filings.
Wow.
And Ms. Singhas was asked about it, and she said, that's a matter for the state. Well, you know what? It's a matter for the Nassau County DA. Clearly, there's jurisdiction, and really, there's an obligation. But, in addition to taking a pass on that, it just tells me that the DA's office doesn't look at the campaign finance filings, because if they did, it wouldn't go 9 years for Norma Gonzalez not to file. Somebody would have woken up at the DA's office and said, listen, we noticed you didn't file. Maybe you should file, right? I'm not saying you lock up Norma Gonzalez and throw the key away. I'm not saying there's any crimes at all. All I'm saying is it's interesting that the DA's office didn't pick up on it. When it appeared in Newsday, the DA said, not interested in investigating. It's not a local matter. So I think her record is terrible. Look, I wouldn't be running if I didn't think I could do a better job. And I shouldn't say think. I know I can do a better job. And that's why I'm running.
So when Kathleen Rice was, all these cases that you mentioned before the break, that Kathleen Rice was the DA actually.
Yes, she
was. Do you think that the second in charge has the power to decide which cases to run, or Kathleen Rice is the DA is the one who does
well,
that.
certainly the DA is at the top, but here, Kathleen Rice was a very political person, and she was out running at one point for Attorney General. She was considering other races. She was, really looking towards this congressional race, I believe, and Medline Singhas was running the shop. So, in my view, I think Singhas really, could have and probably did have a role in these decisions. And again, she's claimed all the successes, right?
Right.
And so and look, when I'm DA, I want a number two, right? A chief assistant who, if I'm wrong, is going to tell me I'm wrong. I don't want a yes person.
Right.
And so the idea, if that's what she was, if Medline Singhas was simply a rubber stamp for Kathleen Rice's decisions, good or bad, well, I don't think that's really who we want as the next Nassau County DA. But again, I don't think she was a rubber stamp. I think she played a role in these decisions. And again, clearly, that's what she's claimed. So I'll take her at her word. Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me something now. The Democratic Party, obviously, right? You're going to run for primaries. So all Democrats can vote in the primary on September 10th. And now party is not backing you.
Well,
is that
the
true
party,
statement?
The party endorsed Ms. Singhas. They were her nominee at the convention. My understanding, and I don't know election law really. I'm not an expert in it, but I understand that if I do get on the ballot, and I have every expectation that I will, that the party isn't supposed to get involved in a primary. Whether they endorsed her or not, whether they nominated her or not, there is a primary process, and the voters ultimately get to decide. And look, that's why I'm running, to give the voters a choice. I think there's a real choice here between me and Ms. Singhas, and I think I'm in a much better position to beat Kate Murray. Kate Murray can point at Ms. Singhas and say, she's been a prosecutor 22 years, but what did she prosecute? What's the quality of the cases? What's her leadership skills? Why? What's her vision? She has no vision for the office. She talked about when she assumed the position of acting DA when Rice was sworn in. She talked about staying the course, right? Everything's fine, staying the course, and cracking down on texting while driving, right? So I'm not a fan of texting while driving. It's dangerous, but we have people being shot dead in the street, and we have a heroin epidemic, and she's worried about texting while driving, right? The other thing was, last week, in the middle of this 4-day period where 3 people were killed in the village of Hempstead, she was holding a press conference about the Dignity Act, which is an act that requires schools to report bullying, right? Bullying is terrible. I don't want my kids to be bullied. I don't want my kids to be bullied, right? It's very important to be bullies.
Right.
But you know what? The Education Department issued that report, right? Why does that have to do with Medline Singhas, other than she's running for DA in November, right? Running. She's never, she assumed this position upon Rice leaving. She's never been elected. It's a political move to get some press. So, you know what? It's, I guess, more about being a politician than a prosecutor. I mean, it has nothing to do with being DA, talking about the Dignity Act or talking about these mailers. And that's why I want to bring my record to the people. And I want to, hopefully Ms. Singhas will come on your show and also talk about her record. And then people will be able to see. We've asked her to debate us. Right. They've said no comment. When we announced on May 6th, I had some, I would say, kind of harsh words for the DA's office's record. And her spokesman's comment was no comment. So at some point, she's going to have to pay attention to me. She's going to have to debate me. Or you know what? She can just pretend there's not going to be a primary on Thursday, September 10th. And the people who signed my signatures, all 6,355 or so, who signed just for me and got my material, know there's a primary on Thursday, September 10th. And they'll come out and vote for me, whether or not Ms. Singhas acknowledges that there is going to be a primary or that I even exist. But I'm running because regardless of who the party's nominee is, I think I'm the best candidate, and I want people to have a real choice for DA.
That's good. I mean, I appreciate that.
Yeah,
and what will be your campaign strategy then? Because your name obviously is not as known as Ms. Singhas.
It's funny. Her name is known if you're on Newsday a lot. My name, people always ask me if I'm related to either Rosanna Scotto, the Scotto brothers, or
Scotto
you know,
brothers, right.
and I say no. So they've at least heard the name, but you're right. And you know what? That's because Newsday hasn't really written about us. I think Newsday believes that there's not going to be a primary, and why write about this guy? Why waste our time? So once we get on the ballot, that's going to change. But frankly, we get our name out by going places and seeing people. I mean, you know, I'm at events, I'm talking to people, and I'm just letting them know that there's actually going to be a primary. And that's really what it's about. You know, the party talks about money. You know, somebody from the party said, "Oh, she'll have $1 million. You can't beat her." And I'm like, well, if I get on the ballot, really, I mean, I don't know much about politics, but I think if I get one more vote than her, whether I have $1 in the bank or $1 million in the bank, you know, I actually get to advance to the general election. And again, hopefully it'll be a lot more than one vote. You know, we don't want to recount like down in Florida. You know, it's just about getting to people and telling them, look, things here are terrible. And you know what? That's what you know, my wife said, why were you in the village of Hempstead so much talking to people? And I said, well, frankly, that's where the highest concentration of registered Democrats are, and that's where the people are really upset, right? They feel underrepresented, they see crime on a daily basis, and nobody's helping them out. And look, the village police does the best job they can, but you know, the village police can't get wiretaps, right? The DA has to work with them to get the wiretaps. And the only way you clean up those drug gangs, you don't go with the guys on the street. Well, sure, you have to, but your focus has to be moving up the chain, right? And the way you do that is wiretaps, undercovers, and ultimately search warrants and seizing massive quantities of drugs. You can arrest all the guys on the street, and they do that. And the other day there was a press conference. The police and Ms. Singhas announced 10 arrests. The problem was 6 of them had been arrested last month, but I guess they figured they were going to re-announce them so people would hear 10. You have to read the story to see 6 had been arrested previously. But they're not talking about people importing massive quantities of drugs. They're talking about street level and a little bit more than that. And you really have to roll these people up and go up to the top and knock them out. You can't just pick off the little guys, because that's never going to get you to stop the problem. And by the way, especially if they're just selling to support their habit. Those are people you want to get treatment for. You want to go after the guys who are making the money off everybody else's suffering. And that's where you put your resources. Yeah.
So grassroots is
grassroots,
the key.
Door to
that's
door,
how you're going to
shaking hands. Yeah, just talking to people.
Talking to people. So you may have to take 2 vitamins a day.
Yes, 2 vitamins a day.
Maybe more.
Maybe more. That's right. Plenty of fluids over the summer. You know, we were very lucky. We were saying the other day that during the petition process, thank God, the weather was okay. It rained a little bit, but it wasn't 90 degrees and humidity. So if it was, you know, it would be, we probably, I don't know if we would have made it. But yeah, 2 vitamins a day, plenty of liquids.
From
and
morning
sleep,
6 to 12.
6 to 12, yeah.
At night, right?
That's right.
That's your
just hard work, you know.
Hard work,
wearing out shoe leather. If you know anybody wears shoes with leather soles anymore, you know. That's all. But yeah, just getting out there and seeing people.
Yeah, I think that's what important is. You know, people have to listen to you.
And they know
people
you're
have
sincere.
to know you. People have to see you.
That's right. And you know what? Some of the times when I was with the campaign staff getting signatures signed, we'd be in a shopping center, and I'd see somebody that we're trying to get a signature from with one of the campaign staffers, and they wouldn't want to talk to them, and I'd walk over and say, "Oh, that's you? Oh, okay. Tell me about yourself." I mean, it's so very important. The other thing is, look, it's selfish, because in order to get elected, you want to meet people. But it's also important because to get elected is only the first part of it. You want to do a good job. You want to do a really good job, and you can't do a good job unless you're talking to people. Right? Yep. And okay, we're now I'm from the town of North Hempstead, right? So I don't get Cape Murray's mailings, but our campaign office is in West Hempstead. So we get, well, I shouldn't say campaign mailings, they're surveys. We get a survey. We got a survey from Cape Murray a couple of weeks ago in the office. And I thought, gee, that's funny, right? Isn't it better to go and talk to people in the community and say, how am I doing, right? Like Ed Koch, how am I doing, right? Instead of sending a mailer with a survey, right? What are you going to learn from a survey? Go and talk to people, be engaged. One of the things the DA's office, in my view, doesn't do enough of is interact with the community. We want to have sort of a community council where people from the community meet with us on a regular basis, right? I want to be in the community. We want to mobile offices, right? We also want to have office hours. That's one thing. The DA doesn't have office hours, right? Anybody should be able to come in and see the DA. You know, you got to call ahead because we want to know what you're going to talk about. It's not, is it going to be micromanaging cases? Oh, I have a case here. No, it's about issues. It's about things like that.
Right.
I mean, I want to be there, want to engage with the people, and the only way you can do the people's business, and that's what the job is about, is by talking to the people.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean,
yeah,
that's what this is about. It's about helping people. It's not about getting into office and 350 patronage jobs, which you hear, maybe some people in the Republican Party are sort of salivating about. It's about helping people.
Right.
And hiring people without regard to political affiliation or what they look like. Although having said that, the DA's office should look like the community. I mean, I'm surprised that there aren't more people who, it's funny for the white guy to say that, but more people of color, whether they be black, Hispanic, whether they're from Southwest Asia or Asia or anywhere, it just should look like the community. And that's the office we had in Manhattan. Mr. Morgenthau didn't have quotas, he just hired good people, and if you're open-minded, you're going to end up with an office that looks like the community. And we don't have that now, at least in my view.
No, I think Nassau County is a very diverse county,
Absolutely.
right? So all kind of people are there from every place.
Absolutely.
And they have to be.
And look, the office needs to look like the county, and they need to know what the concerns are. Now, Ms. Singhas just formed a immigrant affairs unit, which I guess nobody thought was a good idea except a couple of months before an election to have this unit. It's a great idea. We had one in Manhattan for many, many years because recent immigrants are preyed upon by people who are bad, whether it's a lawyer who's unscrupulous. The only problem is they don't have a Spanish interpreter in the unit, which I think is kind of odd because a lot of these recent immigrants need to speak Spanish, right? So it was another, as I like to say, that was a PR initiative rather than an actual law enforcement initiative. And again, that gets to my point that whether she feels in her heart she's a prosecutor, she's not running the office like a prosecutor, she's running it like a politician. And I think the people know that. The people are not stupid. You need to go to the people and explain to them why you're different. And they don't like politicians. They like people who want to change and speak from the heart, and talk to them on their level. Absolutely.
Yeah. What are your community involvements?
I've been involved in Port Washington since I moved back. I was on the Homeowners Association in Manhasset Bay Estates, and I was in the environmental chair because I knew a little bit of environmental law, and I was a legal chair because I was a lawyer, and then I've been the president for the last 3 years. Unfortunately, moving across town, I'm going to have to step down, but I'm also involved in my church. I taught my daughter's religious instruction class for 2 years, member of the Knights of Columbus. I didn't get around to the Sons of Italy yet, but I'm joining in August. And right now, really, the community involvement is just making sure the family is all together. My oldest daughter just graduated from Schreiber, and chaperoned at the Gamble, and just trying to be a good father and a good husband and run a campaign and try to pay the bills with my little law practice on the side. But other than that, there's plenty of time in the day.
You got 4 or 5 hours, man, at night.
A couple of hours at night. And we also, like I said, we recently moved across town. A lot of caffeine and sugar.
There you go. That's it. Yeah. The viewers of this show is mostly from Southeast Asia, right? So what is your message to them now?
Well, hopefully that when I'm elected, there'll be a voice in the DA's office, and there'll be concerns. Look, we talk about the village of Hempstead a lot, right? Right. That's like 10 minutes away from everywhere, right? For us, we're a little bit further up on the peninsula, but it's right smack dab in the middle of the county, and that bleeds over to other parts of the county. And I guess Floral Park has their own police, Garden City has their own police. There's like 20 different police departments. That's the other thing I didn't mention. The DA can kind of be the quarterback of all the different law enforcement agencies. They don't have any sort of centralized focus. So the Nassau Police Department has a lot of analyticals, a lot of computer stuff where they're tracking trends, right? In Manhattan, the DA's office has a crime strategies unit. I think that would be ideal out here because they could take the place of sort of an overriding analysis. But to attack crime that bleeds out of certain areas and goes to areas like Floral Park, New Hyde Park, and whatnot. But just to answer your question, basically, just there's somebody at the DA's office that cares about the community. And look, I don't know how many people from India and Pakistan work in the DA's office, right? I don't know one. Maybe there's one. I don't know. And certainly, we'd be receptive to hiring people regardless of where they're from. I mean, if you're intelligent, right? If you're ethical, if you have good judgment and you're tenacious, you have all the qualities to be a good ADA, regardless of where you come from. So my message would be, hopefully I'll be out in the community, they'll see me there, but I'm not just in the community to get elected, I'm in the community to get elected, but also to know how to do a good job in office, and that's what I want to do.
Well, thank you so much. Really
Thank you for
appreciate
having
it.
me.
And I wish you all the best in September 10th.
Thank you. Now, can I give you a gift? I brought a T-shirt for you.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Limited
Very nice.
edition, and I have to give a plug to my friend Steve Evasas, who I know for like 40 years from Arena Graphics in Port Washington.
Wow.
And they put these together, so it's large, one size fits all.
That's
so hopefully
fine.
it's
That's
not
fine.
too big.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, comments, you can email me at rajmitv@gmail.com. That's again rajmitv@gmail.com. You can watch our prior shows on YouTube at youtube.com/Infosys International. That's youtube.com/Infosys International. Until next time, have a great week.